Hello, and welcome to the mentorDINO podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin Rossier. I am an architect and founder of mentorDINO. Join me each week as I speak with amazing professionals in and around the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, as we are all part of a larger interconnected community. We discuss everything from career stories, lessons learned, and advice for others finding their own unique career path. Thank you to all of our current subscribers, and if you're new, welcome to the conversation. And if you like this episode, please do me a favor by hitting subscribe, like, or share it with a friend. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support them on their own unique career journey. On today's episode of the mentorDINO podcast, I would like to welcome Lucas Gray, Director of Content and Community at BQE Software out in Brooklyn, New York. Thank you, Lucas, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And so I always like starting out with my loaded question. If you don't mind introducing yourself to my listeners to let them know a little bit about your journey so far in education and career.
Cool. So yeah, like you said, my name is Lucas Gray. I have a background in architecture. I studied and then practiced for about 20 years. The last 7 years or so practicing, I was actually running a firm with a couple partners out in Portland, Oregon. I then moved into business consulting for architects. So I left the firm because my wife got a job in New York City, and the work we were doing in Portland was very locally focused. So it didn't really translate. So I sold my shares to my partners, and they're still running the business. And I, followed my wife out to New York, started looking for a new role, and eventually joined CVG as a business consultant. So for the past 3 years, I was working with CVG and their clients, giving advice, helping small architecture firms improve their operations. So it was everything on the non-design side. We weren't telling people how to execute the work, but we were helping with firm administration, financial reporting, strategic planning, organizational design, basically all of the kind of back of house administrative things you need to keep a firm running. I then, just a few months ago, the beginning of this summer, I moved to BQE, where I'm now the Director of Content and Community. My role here is kind of twofold. So the Director of Content side is leading a lot of the content creation that we're doing in-house. So that is doing a lot of writing about the business of architecture and engineering, best practices, blog posts, articles, things like that. I just worked on publishing a benchmarking report. So looking at financial analysis of the data that we have from our application to kind of give what the industry standards are and a whole bunch of different metrics. I do some podcasting like this. I do some webinars and some other content creation in-house. The other side of my role is the community side, which is also kind of part of what I'm doing here, but it's representing BQE out in the architecture and engineering community, building relationships, connecting with people, finding ways that we can support other people doing cool stuff that are kind of addressing the same kind of topics that we address. And then trying to just, build a community around both the software that we make, which is firm management software, but also other people that are kind of discussing these topics. And it seems to be a growing trend in the industry. There's a lot more people talking about the business side of practice. I think I skipped half of your question, which was the educational side. I studied architecture up at McGill University up in Montreal, and then went to grad school at the University of Oregon. Between school and a little bit after school, I also spent a long time living and working abroad. So I lived in Thailand and China, and then Berlin, practicing architecture in different companies before moving back to Portland, working there for some architects, and then starting my own firm.
Yeah, you've been all over. I know. Yes. I was going to mention, I feel the business of architecture side, I feel has really has exploded over the last couple of years with people wanting to talk about it, make it,
more transparent in the conversation and less of like the hidden unknown of what it's like to run a firm. And I don't know if it's just the lack of education that we get in architecture school. Like so many architects are solopreneurs, own their own firm one day, and they don't know how to do any of that until they're thrown into it. And it's a lot like when you start your career and you're just thrown in to figure out architecture, but at least you've been drilling for the last 5 years in architecture school, whereas the business side's a big question mark. So
yeah, and I think there's a few different reasons for that. Part of it is we all know the professional practice course in university that we have to take is not very in-depth. It doesn't do a good job at preparing you for actually running a business. It does talk, I think, a little bit more about the legal side of what it means to be an architect and, some basics of it, but it's not an MBA. It doesn't really teach you the business side. So I think that part of that is people just trying to fill in gaps in their own knowledge. I think traditionally leadership in architecture firms tend to be pretty closed book. They didn't really want to share how the firm was run or the financial side of the firm. I feel that's changing with generational change. Things are becoming a little bit more transparent. More people are willing to talk about how projects are profitable, how a firm is profitable. I also think that right now there's this maybe 5 or 10 kind of thought leaders in the A&E industry that are being very vocal about it through social media and other channels. People like yourself who are doing training, companies, businesses, but also just people who are just trying to shine a light on some of these issues. So just writing about it, talking about it more. I think it's really wonderful. It's really great to see that this has become a bigger part of the profession than architecture with a capital A being just talking about design focused issues.
Yeah, because it'd be great to have beautiful designs and be profitable at the same time, because we are a business. So I know you've shifted a lot in your career from practicing architecture into more of marketing BD and then coaching the business side. So what was that initial shift like, leaving being a more traditional architectural designer type professional?
I think it's looking back at myself being, self-aware. I think I was coming out of school, I was very much the kind of design snob, architect with a capital A type of person. I also, if you probably talk to my friends and other people in architecture school, they probably would have said that about me as well. But pretty quickly after leaving, I started just getting exposed to a lot of the different aspects of running a firm. Part of that was just the time frame. I was looking for jobs in the US after the Great Recession. So it was just a different world. It was much harder to find work. Once you found it, getting projects to keep the firm going was really top of mind for most firms. So when I was working for a firm in Portland, I got hired as a normal, traditional architect working on projects. So, Reviting drawings on large scale public projects. But after about a year, the project we were doing was wrapping up, and I pivoted to work in their marketing department because that was what they needed at the time. So I was one of a team of 3 or 4 people that was putting together RFP and RFQ responses, doing interview prep. I then helped the firm redesign their website. This was 2011. So it was still kind of early in the social media world. So I started, creating some of the social media accounts and profiles for the company and starting to manage some of that. So I got exposed to kind of a little bit of the firm management side of practice, so not doing design work anymore. And then from that experience is when I left and started my own firm with some partners. And the way that we kind of naturally fell into different roles is I kind of fell into managing the business side, and my partners focused more on the design and the architecture side. And just by having that, trial by fire, make mistakes, learn from them, fix them, do something better. I learned a lot about the business side of running a firm. then the other thing we did was around probably after running the firm for 2 or 3 years, we kind of realized that we didn't know a lot about running a business. So we ended up hiring a business coach. Actually, we hired CVG. So that's how I got connected with them initially. So we hired them to help us understand and improve the business side of practice. So working with the team at CVG for, I think it was about 4 years that we were working together while I was running Propel Studio, that, I really had a lot more exposure and had a lot more conversations about, the financial side of running a firm, the management side of, building a team, organizational design, planning for the future, things like that.
Yeah, I know I've actually seen 2 of CVG's presentations. I got to sit in on one of their presentations at AI National this year, and then a couple other associates at WLS. Awesome. And it was fascinating just to see the different structures, because now that I've been around to a couple different firm sizes, even interning where I was like employee 5, very small, kind of down and dirty architecture firm, to the giant 25 plus office location firm, and seeing how the structures are all different is fascinating, and how we can still get the same thing done. And I thought they did a really good job at kind of displaying how that structure can be or change if the firm is growing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
CVG was great. It was super interesting working with them, just building up my own knowledge, but then working for them was super interesting as well, because they serve a wide range of firms from 3 or 4 person offices up to 60 person office. So being exposed to a whole bunch of different firms, different firm sizes, different project types, different structures, different owner personalities, like all of that has such a huge impact on how these firms were making decisions and how that affected their bottom line. So that was really fun to kind of be exposed to so many different ways of running a business. So yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah, I always joke you have to talk to the marketing team, because they tend to figure out the different personalities of different principals a lot faster than the architects, because traditionally we're on a project for an extended amount of time that we can kind of slowly learn. But those quick proposals marketing needs to do, that's where they see the true colors of every principle and all the little nuances. So if I've got a question about a principle, I typically go find a marketing person.
That's smart. Yeah.
So when you switched over to CVG, what was that experience like, learning and helping so many firms rather than being in a firm and growing it? Were there like business structures that worked well for a different size, or transition conversations that really kind of, I don't know, surprised you or created kind of how you think of firms now?
I think it was interesting. So typically, the way that CVG was structured is there's a bunch of different account managers. Each account manager had a certain amount of firms that they were working with. So typically anywhere between like 5 and 8 firms on average that I would be working with at one time. So definitely see a wide range of personalities, different, firm types, different structures, et cetera. But the way that we kind of structured it was based on our personal experiences and skill sets. We would kind of align certain clients with us as account managers. So I tended to be working with a lot of the firms that were probably in the like 5 to 12 person range. And a lot of them were younger firms. So, maybe 5 years old or, 5 to 10 years old that were still working to grow. For instance, Rena Klein from CVG, she works a lot with a lot of the firms that had older leadership that were really planning for leadership transition, leadership succession, or planning for the next generation of people to take over the firm. So we kind of pushed different firms to different people based on kind of the topics that they needed to go discuss or work on. So that's a long way of saying I was exposed to a lot of different things, but not. I tended to not focus on kind of all aspects of a firm's lifespan. My role was really trying to focus on helping firms that had growth goals, but maybe didn't have the confidence or knowledge base in how to set themselves up for that growth. So, hey, they might have had 5 employees and they're struggling to get above that. Like they've kind of had a few people come and go, but they never grew to 10. So it was kind of, how do we get you from 5 to 10 people? So you're kind of taking that next leap. A lot of the things that we would talk about is like, when do you hire? When do you hire admin staff versus billable staff? How do you manage a bigger team once you have that? If you're a sole practitioner, how is leadership decision making different than if you were a husband and wife team, or you started it with a partner like my firm? So a lot of conversations were really about building the infrastructure, the systems and processes, kind of defining those so a firm was ready to take that next step.
Yeah, because especially at that size, hiring an individual is a big step. It is a big financial commitment. I know I've talked with a number of really small firms that try to keep it lean and, hire architects as contractors to them. So then you don't have the benefits burden and the salary burden if a project were to go on hold, because we don't want to let people go. We would love to keep people.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on those that may be struggling to, okay, I really want to hire somebody, but I'm a little bit afraid to take that step, and you're starting to get burned out if you can't keep up?
Yeah, I think starting very small. I think a common mistake that a lot of, let's say, sole practitioners or very, very small firms, so just the owners, make is with the first hire. And quite often, and I did this myself, again, learning from my own mistakes, the first hire is very intimidating. It's a seemingly huge financial commitment. And what people tend to do is try to limit the financial risk of that decision. And what that tends to mean is they hire someone whose salary is pretty low. So usually they're hiring an intern, a recent grad, a junior designer, someone whose salary is going to be as low as possible, so they feel a little bit more comfortable with taking on that financial commitment. I strongly urge firms to think differently about that first hire. And I think it's actually much more effective and less risky to hire someone much more experienced. So if I had to do it over again, I think the first hire that we should have made from our firm would be someone that was about the same experience level as us. So somebody who had the skill set to manage a project on their own without needing our time and the effort that you have to put into training somebody. Because what ends up happening, and this happened to us, is we hire someone, and instead of us being able to give them work to do, which is billable, that brings in revenue to pay their salaries, which opens up my time to go out and market and do business development and bring in the next project, what ends up happening is I'm spending time managing that person, training that person, getting them up to speed so they can be effective and billable. But what I'm not doing is going out and bringing in more work at that when I'm spending that time with that person. So I actually think it's less risky to hire someone with more experience that needs less management or less training. So you actually open up the time on the ownership side to do all the other things you need to do to grow the business.
Yeah, because that's important. And I know that's some of the courses and why I created them on the mentorDINO side was, regardless of the firm size, sometimes when you need that additional help, the gut reaction is to try to put a recent grad on a project to help you get to a deadline. And sometimes that's worse, even at a large firm, because the point of bringing on additional help was to help reduce my workload to either get something else more critically done or not have me working 70, 80 hours a week. So then I can bring the best self to a project every day at work and not be exhausted. But if you bring on somebody that needs that training, you got to bring them up to a certain level first. Yeah. But that also expands your team in a very nice way, that when you do hire a recent grad or a summer intern, you've got more people to spread out the teaching load too. So
yeah, I really think the first hire should be like a project architect, project manager level person And then you build out a team below them because they can manage 3 or 4 or 5 more production junior designers. And they can be the one that's training them, mentoring them, giving them the feedback they need to be more effective. That more senior person owns the project, owns the delivery of it. So you as the firm owner, yes, you're going to manage that person and you're going to manage the team below them a little bit, but you can share that responsibility so your time can be focused on the bigger picture things that you need to do.
Yeah. So when looking at the smaller firm sizes, so that like 15 and under group, was there any consistency on their firm structure that you saw or that you guys would recommend that they shift to as they wanted to grow?
The short answer is there was not a lot of consistency. I think particularly in those smaller firm sizes, so much is dependent on the ownership. So whether it was a sole practitioner who grew, or it was a couple who started a business, or 2 friends or whatever partnered up. I also think there was a big difference. There were some firms that were around 10 people who had been in business for 15 or 20 years, and there were some people who were 10 people but had only been in business for 5 years. And there's a difference between, I don't know if there's a difference. There's different goals that different owners have. So there's 10-person firms who have been around for 20 years and are happy being 10. And they might grow 1 or 2, and then a couple of people leave. And, they're kind of fluctuating on that level. And there's other people who are 5 people who want to get up to 50. So their goals are much different. Their decision-making would be much different because they're really trying to implement a growth-first strategy. There are some basic things that I think a lot of people struggled with or was a big part of setting people up for growth. The biggest one for the small firms is when and who to hire as an overhead staff. So just like we were talking about earlier with hiring your first billable employee, there's different paths you can take, someone junior, someone senior, an architect versus an intern or a recent grad. Same thing on the admin side. I kind of think that for smaller firms that want to kind of stay small or stay, the same size they are now, or maybe have small growth but not really scale exponentially, there definitely needs to be administrative support, and a lot of that is going to be focused on taking the menial work off of the shoulders of the owners. So it tends to be more of like an admin assistant or an executive assistant or just like a general office manager who's going to do kind of the simple, menial tasks like answering the phone, checking the mail, responding to emails, scheduling things, buying supplies, ordering lunch, like all of that stuff that is important and you need to do to keep the business going and whatnot, but aren't really more bigger picture strategic thinking. I do think that if you're planning to grow significantly and scale, you need to bring in somebody who can have more of that, be more of a partner on the administrative side of the business, but who is more senior and more strategic. So that would be someone more on the financial management side of the business, or a marketing director, or there's a bunch of different aspects of running the business that you could bring someone in to support you on, but it should be someone that's relatively senior, relatively skilled, who can really take ownership of that part of the business and kind of be a sounding board and another leader at the firm, rather than someone junior who's just executing on things.
Yeah, and a lot like that junior versus senior architect. It's, if you're bringing in somebody, how can they help bring in more work at the same time, or expand upon just more than the menial tasks, but like the actual business operations itself.
Yeah.
So if you had to start your own firm all over again after being a business consultant, do you have advice for someone looking to start their own firm?
I've thought about this a lot. Kind of like we were chatting before we started the podcast. I would be interested in having another small design firm in some capacity, but probably more as like a side project or something. My wife's also an architect, so something that we do together, but less formal. I don't know if I would want to do it as growing a large business again. It would be kind of more of a lifestyle, pay the rent type of firm. But I have thought about like the mistakes that I made when I started my first one and what I would have done differently and what I would recommend to people. A few things. First of all, designing a firm is a design problem. So just like you would design a building, you should have a bunch of steps you do to get to the final result. And you should be strategic about it. So just like you would do zoning research and site analysis and all these things before you jump into developing the form or style or look of your project, an architectural project, I think that you should do that for a business as well and define what are the goals, what are the outcomes that you want from this business, who do you want to work with, what types of projects do you want to work on, what types of clients. Like all of those conversations and decisions should be intentional. And this was something that I did not do. When I started the firm, we started it because we were frustrated with some of the other aspects of our job. And we started it because we figured we could have a little bit more control over the project types or whatever the issues were. But what that meant is we didn't really have a plan. We didn't really have a set strategy. We didn't have a target market we were going after. It wasn't based on a particular project type. It wasn't based on a potential client persona. So like our marketing was kind of all over the place. Our messaging was all over the place. We had no niche or area of expertise. There was nothing that we were better at than any other architect was good at. So what we ended up doing is you end up competing on price. Your people hire you because you're the new, shingle, and you might work for cheap. And we did, and it was problematic. Like the first few projects, we worked for much too low of a fee to the point where we probably lost money when you actually considered the amount of time we dedicated to those things. So if I had to do it again, I would be very intentional about it. I really think that most firms, if you're actually looking to have a successful, profitable business, you need to be very focused on what problem in the marketplace you're solving. And there's a million different ones. You have to find the one that you're passionate about, you're interested in, you're good at, and that there are clients for, and do that from the beginning. So like, do you want to be a custom residential architect? Do you want to work on schools? Do you want to work on data centers? Do you want to specialize on a material? So like my wife is a specialist in mass timber. Like there's a lot of different paths you can take, but I strongly encourage everyone to pick one that is your main focus, because I think that solves so many other problems and helps you do so many other things. It helps you hire people because you can advertise to the right skill set for people who are also interested in that thing. It helps you identify potential customers. Like if you do schools, it's very easy to research all of the superintendents of school districts within 100 miles of where you live. You can also look for RFPs or RFQs for educational projects. Those are much easier to find than if you're saying, I'll do anything and everything, and you're just waiting for somebody to call. So yeah, be very, very intentional. We talked about this earlier about hiring. I really think the first hire needs to be someone relatively senior. I think that when you get up to that 5, 6, 7 person size is when you should start seriously looking at bringing on an administrative person. So a non-billable person who's going to help with admin, or someone who can help with admin and marketing would be great. That I think you kind of need that administrative person to jump up to that next size. So getting from 6 to 12, I definitely think you need an overhead person to take off some of the tasks of running the firm so the owners can focus on the bigger picture planning, business development, marketing strategy side of the firm. What other tips? Really learn. I started a firm, worked on it for 7 years, and then left and moved to New York. And I had a few months between jobs because of COVID and some other stuff. And I realized I didn't know a lot about all of the different decisions I was making as a firm owner. And I spent 3 months doing nothing but read business books. I wish I did that before I started the firm. But when you start a business, you have to change your mentality. You're no longer an architect first. You're now a business person first. Your responsibility is to run a successful, profitable business. The business that you're in happens to be architecture or engineering or interior design or whatever the specific work you're doing is, but you're a business person if you run the business, if you're an owner. And you have to think that way first. You're giving up being an architect. You're going to hire people to do the architecture. And you might still be the design director or give, direction to all the projects. You still might manage relationships with clients. Your first responsibility is to understand and manage the business side of the firm. So educate yourself, read books, listen to podcasts, go do webinars or online courses or whatever you can to arm yourself with the knowledge to be as successful as possible.
Yeah, I know even when I explain tasks to recent grads, I try to give them the business side and reasoning for it, even just like staffing schedules. And it's, they're so worried about hitting the exact 8 hours that they put on for the week. And I'm like, if you need 9 to finish it, do the 9. It's a guess, and this is why. But if you're going to need to go way over it, then talk to your project manager. If you're way under it, then, hey, we allocated some additional time. And if you need to move around weeks, it's not hard science, and trying to teach them the business side on how something was put together. So then they can evaluate what they're doing and then bring up business related concerns and not just blowing the fee on a project, so they can kind of understand it, even though they may have no idea what AIA contracts are yet, or even looked at one, or the different fee structures on a project. So
I think
as early as possible.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. One of the things that I firmly believe in and advocated for with my advising clients is default to transparency. It is better to share more information than less, from firm finances to project schedules, contracts. I think all of that should be open book. I think I wanted every single one of my employees to, if you have a question about what the deliverable is, go look at the contract, read it, so you know what we promised and what the fee was for that work, so you can help us better manage it. Because quite often, people working on the project day to day have a better understanding of what's happening than a firm owner who might come in and review drawings or review the work, but not, be the boots on the ground on a daily basis. So I wanted everyone to have as much understanding of how projects make money, how they can be part of the management of that project to be successful as possible.
Yeah, and hit that scope creep if you only promise 5 renderings and now you're on your 30th rendering.
Yeah. And raise your hand. And if you're worried about something, tell me as the firm owner that, hey, I'm concerned we're going over budget, or we're going over time, or you promised this and we're not delivering that, or whatever. I want everyone to feel free or enabled to feel ownership and responsibility, that they can raise their hand and explain to the firm owner that, hey, something's not right here. Let's
talk about it. Yeah. And so then pivoting over to the software side of business management, can you explain what BQE software is and what firms can utilize that for what you're making so much content around?
Yeah. So BQE is a software company that makes, historically has made a few different products that focused on the operations and financial management side of architecture and engineering firms. It was started by an engineer and an architect that developed software for their own companies. And then they saw that there was a bigger need for that out in the industry. So they developed it as a product that they started to offer to other firms. The main product that we have now is called BQE Core, and it's kind of like an all-in-one firm management tool. So it does kind of everything that it covers a lot of the topics we've talked about today. So everything from financial management and accounting and bookkeeping for firms, billing and invoicing, as well as resource management, time tracking, scheduling, project management, task management, kind of all of the back of house administrative side of running, successful firms and successful projects. So it's a cloud-based tool that your whole team logs into. They get access to, reports and data, and they track their time in there. The financial side of the firm will use it to create invoices, send those to clients, collect payments, et cetera. And then all of the data is synced across the whole app. So you have a live view of what's happening in the firm at any given time.
Yeah. Is there a proper firm size? Because I know we talked a lot about small firms versus large firms, and some of the ones when they start out, it's, hey, they may not be jumping into a QuickBooks software right away. They may be keeping track of stuff through Excel and taking those baby steps, and not as big of a financial hit when you're trying to get going. So is there levels within BQE Core based on the firm size, or how does it change based on firm level? Because they may not need all the reports for a small firm, but a large firm that could be huge for somebody that's really pulled away from so many projects.
Yeah. The quick answer is we offer a tool that can be used for a very wide range of firms, from one person to multiple hundreds of people. I would say that our kind of niche or ideal customer is in the kind of 20 to 100 person firm. That's where the complexity of the firm really aligns with the robust features of the software to be the most effective tool to use. That being said, we have sole practitioners who use our software, 5-person firms, 10-person firms, multiple hundreds of person firms. So it is very flexible. It really depends on, what you want to use the software for and what you need to get out of it. There is the core features of it, no pun intended, that kind of cover the basics. So accounting, time tracking, invoicing, kind of the project scheduling, things like that. Then there are some other modules that you can add on to it. So if you need more complexity or additional features like a CRM tool or full accounting tools, whatever, you can kind of scale it to give you the features you need for depending on the complexity of your business. As far as pricing goes, it is scalable also with the size of firms. So you are paying by user like a lot of other subscription softwares out there. So it is easily scalable depending on if your firm is growing or how big or small you are.
Yeah, because even learning what programs different firms use that I've interviewed, it's there hasn't been that one software that could do all of it, because it also depends if you're how you're keeping track of your hourly rate versus invoicing, how you're invoicing, and a lot of the times people are using different software programs because a lot of them aren't meant for an AEC type of firm that tracks things differently. It's not just straight hourly employees or salaried employees. It's hourly, but you're billing your hours to different projects and different clients. So there's a little bit more minutia in it. So, and I'm a data junkie. So if I can see all the data and see analytics on I would love to see all the good months, bad months, see what hours went where. Were you correct on your prediction of hours? Were you wrong? All that stuff. I love seeing just kind of the back end and learning from it.
That's the big value add and what we talk about in a lot of our content and as well as our marketing and sales messaging. But it's a data-driven world now, and it is surprising how few architects are using kind of robust cloud-based firm management tools. I think even on the larger firms, still 50% of firms are relying on manually updated spreadsheets and maybe QuickBooks or some external accounting tool, but still the majority of firms are not integrating all of this data across different aspects of their business. So their accounting tool probably doesn't talk to their time tracking tool. Their spreadsheets that they're using for project management don't integrate with those other ones. So a lot of it is copy paste, manual entry, data transfer from place to place. And at this point in time, that's just not the most effective way to run a firm, especially if you're trying to grow. If you're trying to grow the firm, you really want some sort of tool that can be a little bit more robust and give you the data and information you need to make smarter decisions quicker.
Yeah. Or else you're just making those tools on your own and having to manually put it in. Then there's just more chances for human error to it. So as a director of content community, what are you doing in that role within the business?
Yeah, so my role is on the marketing team. So we have a pretty small team. I think there's 6 of us now. And we are tasked with building awareness of what we're building. So we have a full development team and product managers who are kind of building the app itself and adding different features. And we are there to tell the story of our customers and then how our tool can help them be successful. So a lot of my role specifically is using my background in architecture and as well as business consulting to create content to help give advice and tips on how to run a better business, strategies to improve, invoicing, for instance, things like that. Part of it is also just having conversations with people. So conversations with people like yourself, conversations with other consultants who are serving the architecture and engineering worlds for a bunch of reasons. One, to keep up to date on the latest trends and what people are thinking about, what firms are concerned with, so we can create either new tools or new content to help people. But also the goal is to just, to be frank, I want every architect and every engineer to know what BQE Core does and consider it as a potential option for how they manage their businesses. So a lot of it is just creating content that we think would be valuable to the community, hoping that just by having a value add, they'll become aware of what we do and how we might be able to help them when they're ready to think about a new software tool.
Yeah. So then when you combine everything together, so your experience and practice and starting a firm, your business consulting, and now the business management tool side, what do you think is missing most from professionals understanding the business side of practice?
Architecture, engineering, whatever, you start a firm. There's first a mental block between being the practitioner, being the architect, being the engineer, and being the business person. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big one, is just mentally transitioning your identity to no longer be caught up in I'm a designer, but now I'm a business person. And then once you make that mental shift, to me, the biggest part of that is architects tend to be very progressive, socially aware, forward thinking in a lot of different ways. And a lot of that also has to do with kind of labor issues and labor practices and things. And I think that there is a little bit of an ingrained feeling amongst a lot of people that we should not think about or talk about profit. And that as an industry, we're not profit driven. That really what we are is socially driven, solving social problems, addressing issues in our community, designing beautiful things, of course, the capital A side of architecture and winning design awards, that's very important. But quite often the design side and the social side, I feel, takes a precedence over the financial sustainability of an individual firm or the industry as a whole. And I think that has to change. And it has to change very quickly. Because I think we're losing out to lots of other industries who are overtaking us in many ways in terms of profitability, financial stability, wages, attracting the right talent, but also growing into covering a lot of the services that architects have traditionally done. And I think you see this in a lot of the more kind of tech startups that have started moving into the real estate world and delivering architecture or buildings in a different way than kind of traditional design bid build. So I really think that the industry needs to attract the best people to be strong and financially stable. I think salaries to do that, to attract the right people, need to go up significantly. Like a starting salary of where I'm in New York, it's super expensive to live here, and there's starting salaries for $50,000, $60,000 a year, which just won't cover cost of living. I think for bigger cities, we need starting salaries at $100,000. And then the ceiling should be much higher. When the AI just came out with a report, but like the average, not the average, but like the high point in an architect's career is probably a ceiling of around $200,000 a year. And that's like 20, 30 years of experience being a partner or CEO of a firm. Where if you move into an industry like tech or real estate development or many other things out there, your ceiling is way, way, way higher. Starting salaries are much higher, and your ceiling is kind of infinite. And I think architecture needs to start thinking that way. So if your cheapest labor is going to be $100,000 a year in salary, how can you design a business that is profitable, knowing that that is the salary base? I don't know what the answer is to that, and I don't think anyone quite does yet. But I think that that's the challenge that the industry needs to address. And I think it's the next 5-10 years that this answer has to happen, or we're going to get absorbed by all of these other, bigger tech companies or real estate development companies or vertically integrated, businesses that are going to absorb kind of traditional architecture services.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to transparency. I know you said being as transparent as possible. There's so many states that are now requiring that when you see a job listing that you see the salary range on there. And I've seen a project manager role for more of a tech company, and it was like PM for construction, and it was like $250K. And I could have stayed in Pittsburgh, and I do not have the cost of living as New York. Yep. And you see that, and I'm like, okay, you see the $200K ceiling you mentioned. That's already above that, and that's not even firm ownership. That's just being a project manager.
Yep.
And I know I did an equity report in Pittsburgh. I did it in 2019 and 2023. I'll have to see if I have time next year to keep up with my every other year cycle. But those numbers, I still bring them up from 2 years ago when somebody's looking at, hey, what's a starting salary like? I'm like, well, here's right here, Pittsburgh area. This is what you're looking at. And having those numbers is just that confidence. I've helped not only local firms be able to figure out what salary range they should be putting themselves in, but also people looking for jobs. And it's the more transparency all these other industries are going to get, we're going to have to change too. And COVID, all the material prices went up, lead times went up. Like, those didn't change to revert back. I don't argue with my lawyer, hey, let's bring down your hourly rate, or a surgeon. If somebody's going to do surgery, I'm not going to go counter their hourly rate or how much a surgery is. If I need it, I need it. Yeah. So, and if we're supposed to be at that practice level, we got to act like it.
I think there's one aspect to this conversation that needs to be addressed or discussed in more forums, is that people talk about there's a competitive market. So my salary for the job that I'm posting, the salary offer, is competitive with other architecture firms. And I'm like, cool, but you're not competing just with other architecture firms. You're competing with tech. You're competing with finance. You're competing with law and real estate developers and whatever. So we have, like, if you want the best people to work for your business and innovate and create the next cool thing or a value add to your customers so you can sell more or get more profit, I think that we need to start being competitive with other industries and thinking that way rather than thinking insular about, well, this is architecture and architects pay this. And I'm like, yeah, but I mean, excuse me, but many people leave.
Yeah,
like I left.
They'll go on the developer side, the owner side. The amount of people I've interviewed that have pivoted and still are practicing architecture, but in a different way. And it's doing pretty much the exact same thing that they'd be doing inside of an architecture firm, but with less stress, less hours in a week, and more pay. Can't really...
The big one I would throw in there is also less risk. Like architecture is a very, very high risk profession. Like, we're liable for potentially millions or billions of dollars of damages. Architects love to say that we protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Well, yes, but we're not compensated to that level of responsibility. So yeah, you can double your salary with zero risk working for a tech company. The question is, why not? Why wouldn't everyone do that? And I think that's what we have to start answering in the architectural world.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see where the next couple years go to a decade. And I think we're in a spot of a very big pivotal shift, and there's going to be a lot of changes. So
yeah, I 100% agree. And I think part of that is also just the generational change that we're going through. And the baby boomers is a big generation that's kind of passing on these firms to the next generation who are going to make much different decisions. We all know about the technology, how fast technology changes, and even what's happened the last 6 months with AI tools and how fast that's been evolving. That's going to have a huge impact on everything that architecture firms have to think about for the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. And I always like wrapping up my podcast with this final question. And it's, what advice do you have for young professionals just starting their career?
Be curious, I would say, is the first one. I think one thing that, looking back on my own career, I came out of school, I was kind of a design snob, and I wanted to work for like fancy design firms. And then I wanted to, my free time, go visit architecture and then read about architecture and then go out for beers with architects and whatever. But it's so limiting. And I think you would be better served, or I would have been better served, by being more curious about more things early on. So read books not about architecture. Like, seriously, if you want to be the best architect, you should be reading books about business. I think everyone should be reading books about marketing and business development, because if you want to advance in your career faster, figure out how to bring in work. Like, that would be the biggest skill set outside of traditional like design, drawings, etc., that I think more architects should learn. But also figure out what you're passionate about outside. Like, even in the context of architecture, like I was saying, if you're starting a firm, pick your niche. Like, find other topics and learn about them and become an expert in it. So if you want to be an architect, but you're also really interested in, I don't know what, like sustainability or, bioengineering or AI, whatever it is, start learning about those things and go hang out with those people and go to those conferences and watch movies about those topics, read those books, because that's going to make you a better architect to serve that clientele and use your skill set and your expertise to impact that part of the world that you're passionate about. That's what I wish I did more of when I was younger. And I hopefully am making up for lost time. Like, I try to read every day something about something that's not architecture specific, but either different psychological studies that are going on, or business books, or marketing advice, or a lot of different blogs and newsletters and things about a whole bunch of different topics, just so I can learn about the world and what other people are working on.
Yeah, no, that's really important. I know I've got a whole shelf of books in my audiobook collection that I'll listen on my car rides, and none of them are architecture or design anymore. They're all related to other avenues, marketing, business, how we grow, and expanding my reach more than just, okay, I practice architecture.
Yeah.
And seeing where it takes me. And it's been a fun ride ever since I started mentorDINO. And it's when I made that shift, I felt like my architecture career also was like hitting the gas pedal to the car, and you never would have thought like learning something else can actually accelerate your career. So
yeah, I think curiosity and continued learning is like the most important thing. The other little bit of advice I'll give, particularly if you're working in larger firms, but go and ask other people in other roles what they do. Like, if you work at a 100-person firm and there's a director of finance, like, invite them out for lunch and like say like, hey, tell me about your job. Like, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? How does that impact how our firm is run? Learn about the marketing team. Ask to work with them on a proposal. Whatever. Find the different departments and the different experts that are in your firm and learn from them. And ask them. You don't have to ask it specifically, but be mentored by a wide range of people. So it's not just I'm a junior architect. I'm being mentored by the project architect above me, but learn from all the different, like the spec writer, the IT guy. Like there's so many people in an architecture office that you can learn from. Take advantage of that as a resource.
Yeah. Anybody and everybody you can learn from.
Yeah. And I try to like have a lunch with somebody like once a week, someone different from the office who wasn't on my team. I didn't really know, like, hey, like we're in the same office. We see each other every day. Let's go have a lunch and get to know each other more and ask questions.
Yeah, that is fantastic advice. And if anybody wants to learn more about BQE or reach out to you, what's the best way to get a hold of you and your team?
BQE.com is the easiest way to learn about the software. You can always connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find and I'm pretty active there. So that would probably be the best way. Feel free to connect with me. I'm pretty promiscuous there. I'll accept almost anybody. DM me if you have questions or there's anything I can do to help. Yeah.
Sounds good. And I'll leave all the links down below in the show notes to make it easy for anybody to find you. But awesome. I wanted to thank you so much, Lucas, again, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. This was fun.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Learn some advice to take with you and see how our industry is all tied together to create the world around us. Check out the description below for any links or resources we discussed. If you liked the episode, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support finding that career path that best works for them. If you know someone that has inspired your own career that you'd like me to interview, let me know in the comments below, or you can reach out to me via my website or LinkedIn. I'd be happy to share their story or your own. Thank you again, and I cannot wait for the next career story I get to share with you next week.